I stood in the driveway of the house I had paid for, watching my son-in-law load my daughter's furniture into a rented truck, and I did not say a single word, not because I had nothing to say. I had been rehearsing what I wanted to say for the better part of 3 years. I stayed quiet because by that point, I'd already said everything that needed to be said. I had said it in writing, with a lawyer's signature at the bottom of the page. Let me back up. My name is not important. What is important is that I spent 34 years working for a civil engineering firm in Hamilton, Ontario, that I retired at 62 with a pension I was proud of, and that I raised my daughter on my own after her mother passed from a stroke when my daughter was 17. I want you to understand that because it matters to everything that comes after. It was just the two of us for a long time. I did not spoil her. I want to be honest about that too. I gave her what she needed, I pushed her to be self-sufficient, and I thought I had done a reasonable job. She graduated from McMaster, got a job in marketing, and at 28 she married a man named, I will just call him my son-in-law, because that is what he was to me for 9 years, and that is the only title I can use without my jaw tightening. He seemed fine at first. He had that quality some people have of seeming completely reasonable, until the circumstances change and you realize the reasonableness was situational. He worked in sales, good months and bad months, he always said, with that shrug he had, the one that meant he had already decided the bad months were someone else's fault. They rented an apartment in Burlington for the first couple of years. Then they had their son, my grandson, and the apartment got crowded, and they started talking about buying. This was around 2017. And anyone who was trying to buy a house in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area at that point knows what that market looked like. I watched them struggle with the math. I had the money. My pension was solid. I had the equity from selling the house I had lived in for 20 years, and I had some investments that had done well. I'm not a wealthy man by any standard that would impress anyone in Toronto. But I was comfortable, and I was 63 years old and living alone in a 2-bedroom condo in Dundas, and I had more space in my financial picture than I needed. So I did what I suspect a lot of parents in my situation do. I set my daughter down, and I told her I wanted to help. Not give, I said. Help. I told her I would contribute $140,000 toward the down payment on a house, enough to get them into something decent in Stony Creek without being crushed by the mortgage. I told her I expected them to carry the mortgage themselves, to pay the property taxes, to take care of the place. I was not buying them a house. I was giving them a start. That is how I framed it. That is how I meant it. I did not put any of that in writing. I want to stop here for a moment, because that is the part I have to own. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since. I was 63 years old, I had spent my career reading contracts, and I handed over $140,000 on the strength of a conversation and a hug. I think I told myself that the paperwork would have felt like a signal of distrust, that asking my daughter to sign something would have poisoned the gesture. What I did not let myself think about, not clearly, was that the paperwork was not about distrust. It was about having something to stand on when memory got convenient. And memory, I have learned, can get very convenient, very fast. They bought the house in Stony Creek in the spring of 2017. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a yard for my grandson. I went to the closing with them. I wrote the transfer to my daughter's account the week before. I watched her sign the papers, and I felt the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he has done something genuinely useful. For the first year, things were fine. I came for Sunday dinners. I took my grandson to Confederation Park on Saturday mornings when the weather was good. My son-in-law and I watched the Ticats games together when they were on, and even though he was not much of a football person, he made the effort, and I appreciated it. I told myself the arrangement was working. The first ask came in the spring of 2018. My son-in-law had had a bad quarter, which had followed a bad quarter before it, and they were behind on the mortgage by 6 weeks. My daughter called me, not him, which I noted but did not examine closely enough at the time. She said it was temporary, that his company had restructured the commission schedule, that things were turning around. She asked if I could cover 2 months of mortgage payments while they caught up. The mortgage was $2,200 a month. I transferred $4,400 that same afternoon. They caught up. Things did turn around, at least on the surface. I did not ask to be paid back, and the subject was not raised. The second ask came 8 months later. The furnace, $1,200. Then in early 2019, the car, my son-in-law's car, needed a transmission repair that insurance wouldn't cover. $2,800. Then my daughter called in April of that year to say they wanted to put my grandson in a hockey program, and the registration fees and equipment costs were going to run close to $3,000, and she wanted to know if I could help with half. I gave her the full amount. I want to be honest about my state of mind during this period, because I think it is important. I was not unaware that the asks were increasing. I was not a fool. But every time I started to feel something that might have been resentment or alarm, I pushed it down with a different feeling, which was that I did not want my grandson to go without. I told myself that I was helping him. I was also, though I would not have admitted this at the time, afraid of what would happen if I said no. Not afraid they would take my grandson away or anything dramatic like that, just afraid of the coldness, the awkward Christmases, the Sunday dinners that stopped happening. I had already lost my wife. I did not want to lose my daughter, too. That fear was the door they walked through. By 2021, I had transferred, in total, somewhere around $60,000 to my daughter and her husband over and above the original down payment. I had not kept careful track, which was itself a kind of willful blindness I am not proud of. I knew the number was large. I did not want to know exactly how large, because knowing exactly would have forced a conversation I was not ready to have. The conversation was forced anyway, just not the one I expected. In the summer of 2021, my daughter told me they were planning a trip. She and her husband and my grandson were going to spend 2 weeks at a resort in Kelowna, in the Okanagan. They had found a place that had a pool and the private beach on the lake, and my grandson had been asking about going somewhere warm. She showed me pictures on her phone. The place looked beautiful. Expensive. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that the total cost was going to be around $12,000, and she wanted to know if I would like to come along. She said it would mean a lot to my grandson. She said there was a unit next to theirs that was still available. I said yes. Of course I said yes. My grandson was 7 years old, and he wanted his grandfather on the trip, and the image of the two of us on that lake together was something I could not say no to. What I did not know, what I did not find out until much later, was that I had not been invited because my daughter wanted me there. I had been invited because my presence was how they were going to pay for the trip. She told me about the cost of the adjacent unit the following week. It was $4,200 for the 2 weeks. I paid it without question. I also bought the flights, since she mentioned they were getting expensive. Another $2,200 for 4 tickets. I also sent money for what she called the activity fund, another $800. I did not add it up in the moment. We went. The trip itself, I will say honestly, was a good 2 weeks in many respects. My grandson and I went kayaking twice. I taught him how to fish off the dock. I sat on the deck of my unit in the evenings and watched the sun go down over Okanagan Lake and felt, for stretches of an hour or two, completely at peace. But I also watched my son-in-law. I watched him at the resort's restaurant, ordering without looking at prices. I watched him upgrade their rental car at the airport without blinking. I watched him talk to my daughter in a low voice by the water one evening, and I watched her glance back at me, and something in that glance did not sit right. When I got home, I started paying attention in a different way. I'm not naturally a suspicious person, but I am a methodical one. 34 years of engineering work will do that to you. I started keeping a simple ledger, nothing sophisticated, just dates and amounts going back as far as I could accurately reconstruct. I went through my bank records, my transfer history. I looked at the numbers I'd been refusing to look at. The total from the first transfer in 2018 to the Kelowna trip was $57,400, on top of the $140,000 down payment. I sat with that number for a long time. I did not call my daughter. I did not confront my son-in-law. What I did was call a friend of mine from my working years, a man named, I will call him my old friend, who had practiced real estate law in Hamilton for 30 years before retiring. I took him for lunch at a place we both liked on King Street, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always respected about him. When I finished, he looked at his coffee for a moment, and then he said, "Do you know what's actually on title for that house?" I did not know. I had assumed my daughter's name was on it, and possibly my son-in-law's. I found out 2 weeks later, through a title search my old friend helped me arrange, that the house was in both their names jointly, which was not, technically, any of my business. The money I had contributed had not been a loan with a registered interest. It had been a gift. I had no legal claim on the property. My old friend explained this to me, with the careful gentleness of someone who has had to deliver this kind of news before. I went home and I sat in my condo, and I thought about what I actually wanted. Not legally, not strategically. What I actually wanted. What I wanted was for my daughter to know that I knew. I wanted her to understand, without any ambiguity, that the man she had been treating as an ATM was not unaware of what had been happening. I did not want a legal battle. I did not want to take back the house. I did not want to stop seeing my grandson. I wanted the thing I had been too afraid to want before. I wanted it to stop. I also wanted a record. I called my daughter in September of 2021, and I asked her to come to my condo alone, without her husband. She seemed uncertain about that, but she came. I made tea and we sat at my kitchen table, and I put the ledger in front of her. Every transfer, every date, every amount. I watched her face. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said it was not as simple as it looked. She said they had been having a hard time. She said the housing market had put them in a difficult position, and that I had always made it clear I wanted to help. She said she thought I understood. I told her I had understood something different from what she was apparently describing. We talked for 2 hours. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. There were tears, hers, and honestly some of mine. I told her what I had been afraid to tell her for 3 years, that I felt used, that I felt like the only time she called was when something needed to be paid, that I was 67 years old, and I had been slowly spending down money I had spent a lifetime saving, and that the thing hurting me most was not the money, it was that she had let it happen. She apologized. She said she had not seen it clearly. She said he had pushed them into a lifestyle they could not afford, and she had gone along because it was easier than fighting with him about it, and she had let the calls to me become the solution. She said she was sorry, and I believe she was. I also believe people can be genuinely sorry for something and still not fully understand how they got there. The reason I believe that is what happened over the following 14 months. Things were better for a while. The calls became more normal again. She called sometimes just to talk. My son-in-law was cooler toward me at family gatherings, which I took to mean he knew she had spoken to me, and that his particular ease with asking me for things had been disrupted. There were no asks for about 8 months. Then the roof? She called in November of 2022 to tell me the roof of the house was showing significant wear, and they had gotten a quote for $23,000 to have it properly replaced. She wanted to know if I could help with part of it. She said my grandson was in the house. I said I would think about it. I had never said that before. I had always said yes, or I will take care of it. Saying I would think about it felt like learning a new word in a language I had been afraid to speak. I thought about it for a week. Then I called her back and I said I would help with the roof. But I told her I wanted to do something differently this time. I told her I was going to engage a lawyer and structure the contribution as a registered second mortgage on the property. I told her this was not about distrust. It was about me being 68 years old and needing to manage my finances with more discipline, and that the mortgage could be for a nominal amount with no payment schedule, but I needed something on title. I told her this in a calm voice, and I meant every word of it. There was a long silence on the phone. She said she would have to talk to her husband. She called back 3 days later and said that he was not comfortable with that arrangement. He felt it would complicate the title and cause problems if they ever needed to refinance. She asked if there was another way to handle it. I said there was not. She said they would find another way to deal with the roof. I said okay, and I meant that too. I did not hear much from them for the next few months. My daughter called occasionally, shorter conversations. My son-in-law did not call at all. I saw my grandson in Christmas, and he had grown 3 inches and was completely obsessed with Minecraft. And he sat with me for an hour and showed me things on his tablet, and I thought, whatever else is happening, this is still real. In the spring of 2023, my daughter called and asked if we could meet again, just the two of us. She came to the condo, and this time the conversation was shorter. She told me she and her husband were separating. She said it had been coming for a long time. She said the financial pressure had broken something between them that she did not think could be repaired. She said she was sorry it had taken her this long to see him clearly. I did not say I told you so. I did not think it. I just sat with her at that kitchen table the same way I had sat with her when her mother died. Which is to say, I did not try to fix anything. I just stayed. She and my grandson moved into a rental apartment in Ancaster the following month. He moved out of the Stony Creek house. They listed it for sale in June of 2023, and it sold for significantly more than they had paid for it. Because that is what the Hamilton market does. After the mortgage was paid out and the agents took their commission, there was equity left. My daughter got half of it. She called me a few weeks after the sale closed. She asked if she could come over. She came and she sat down, and she put an envelope on the kitchen table, the same table where we had the hard conversation 2 years earlier. She pushed it toward me. Inside was a check for $48,000. She said she knew it was not everything. She said she had thought a long time about what was right, and this was the number she had landed on. She said it was hers to give, not his, and she had given it. I held the check for a moment without saying anything. Then I asked her if she wanted tea, and she said yes. And I got up and put the kettle on, and we sat in my kitchen for the rest of that afternoon, just talking, the way we used to when she was younger. And it was just the two of us, and the world was simpler than it turned out to be. I deposited the check the next morning. I am not going to pretend the money did not matter, because it did. But the money was not the thing that meant the most to me about that afternoon. What meant the most was that she came, that she sat down at that table and she put that envelope down without being asked, and without a lawyer involved, and without me having to spend one more year of my life being afraid of the coldness. She came because she had decided to come, and that was the thing I had not been sure was still possible. I am 69 years old now. I live in my condo in Dundas, and I take my grandson to Confederation Park on Saturday mornings when the weather is good, and he is 9 years old and he still holds my hand when we walk along the waterfront, though I know the years of that are numbered. I have my pension and I have my routines, and on certain evenings I sit on my small balcony with a cup of coffee, and I look at the escarpment and I feel something I can only call a quiet sufficiency. Not happiness exactly. Not resolution, just the particular stillness of a man who knows, finally and completely, where he stands. I will tell you the one thing I wish someone had told me earlier, not to save the money, though I wish I had managed that better, but this: the conversation you are afraid to have is never as destructive as the silence you use to avoid it. I spent 3 years funding a life I was not part of, because I was afraid of what honesty would cost me. What it actually cost me was more than the honesty ever would have. If you recognize something in this story, you already know what to do. You have known for a while. You are just afraid, the same way I was afraid. And I am telling you the fear is smaller than it looks from where you are standing. There is a moment I keep coming back to. Not the check, not the lawyer's office, not the title search, not the afternoon I finally laid the ledger on the kitchen table. The moment I keep coming back to is earlier than all of that. It is me, standing at the kitchen counter of my condo in Dundas, transferring $4,400 to my daughter's account on the same afternoon she called to ask for it. I did not hesitate. I did not ask a single question. I just typed the amount and hit confirm, and then I went back to whatever I had been doing, and I told myself that this was what a good father does. That is the part that took me the longest to understand. The money was never really the problem. The problem was that I had confused generosity with goodness, and I had been doing it for years. Being decent is not the same as being willing to be taken from, knowing the difference, and having the clarity to act on it. That is something I had to learn the hard way, late in life, in a kitchen in Hamilton. What my son-in-law had was a certain kind of intelligence, not wisdom, not integrity, but a sharp, practical read on human weakness. He understood, perhaps better than I did, that I was afraid of losing my daughter. He understood that fear made me slow, that it made me explain away things I should have questioned, that it kept me from having the conversation that needed to happen. He was not the only one responsible for the years of transfers. I handed him the lever. I kept it greased. My daughter was not a villain in this story. She was someone who had not yet built the habit of standing on her own judgment when it was inconvenient. That is a failure of a different kind. Not malice, but the slow erosion that happens when you keep taking the path of least resistance. She let the calls to me become the solution because it was easier than the argument at home, and I let the calls become the solution because it was easier than the conversation I was afraid to have. We were both, in our own ways, avoiding the harder thing. The harder thing turned out to be survivable. That is what I did not know when I was so afraid of it. What I know now is that the capacity to look clearly at a situation, to see it for what it is, rather than what you wish it were, is not cruelty. It is actually the most useful thing a person can offer someone they love. When I finally put the ledger on the table, I was not punishing my daughter. I was treating her like someone capable of handling the truth, and she was. She needed time, and she needed her own reckoning, but she was. The check she brought me was not just money. It was evidence that she had found, somewhere in herself, the thing that had been missing, the willingness to do the uncomfortable thing because it was right, not because it was easy, not because it was required, because she had decided on her own that it was what an honest person does. I'm prouder of that than I would have been of any amount. My grandson held my hand on the waterfront last Saturday and told me about a YouTube video he had seen about how bridges are built, and I listened to every word. He is 9 years old and he is curious about how things are constructed. I think that is the best thing a person can be, at any age, genuinely interested in how things hold together. I hope someone teaches him before life does it the rough way that the structures worth building take longer, that shortcuts in the foundation always show up eventually, and that the people who last are the ones who are willing to do the hard part first. I am 69 years old, and I am still learning that myself.